Homai Heremai, Tenekoto, Tenekoto, Tenekoto Katoa. Warm greetings, everyone who is joining us here in New Zealand or from across the globe. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the lecture of Maria Gabriella Trovato as part of the Thinkers and Doers lecture series. If you don't know me, my name is Bruno Marquez, and I'm the Program Director for Landscape Architecture at Te Rangawaka, Victoria University of Wellington. If you are new to our lecture series, the Thinkers and Doers aims at bringing together practitioners, scholars, students, and the wider community of landscape architecture, but also the affiliated built environment disciplines to share ideas and to hear the latest innovations in the field. This is an initiative between the New Zealand Institute of Landscape Architects and our program at Victoria University of Wellington. Our 13th speaker, Maria Gabriella Trovato, is an assistant professor at the American University of Beirut, Lebanon. She is a licensed architect and a landscape architect, and she holds a PhD in landscape architecture. As an architect practicing and teaching landscape design, Maria Gabriella is interested in investigating new forms of urban living in a world of change and fluxing conditions due to climate change, depletion of natural resources, conflicts between globalization and local development, and relocalization of war refugees. Her work urges us to respond to such pressures by investigating and proposing combinations of ecological performance and design culture. Her most recent work focuses on landscape in an emergency, landscape assessment, and waste management, migration governance, among others. Gabriella is also well known to be the chair of the International Federation of Landscape Architects working group titled Landscape Architects Without Borders. And through that, working with the informal Syrian settlements in Lebanon and exploring landscape methodologies that could permit the definition of a flexible, relational, and creative strategy that's capable of managing continuous change and transformations. Her lecture, titled Spaces of Crisis and Conflict, Landscapes in Emergency, focuses on the migratory pressures of the Mediterranean region that currently are exacerbating inequalities, undermining human rights and environmental justice. At the end of 2019, 79.5 million people were forcibly displaced worldwide, and nearly 50 million of them are internally displaced, while 73% are hosted in neighboring countries, with the majority of the world's refugees, 85%, hosted by developing countries. And Lebanon is the host of nearly 1.2 million Syrian refugees, representing around a quarter of the country's total population. So the transformation we are witnessing in the last decades is leading to societal shifts and to the production of entirely new landscapes in which all the new narratives and memories are mixed up. So this lecture questions the role of landscape design in envisioning scenarios at varying scales and phases of intervention to address social and environmental emergencies. The work presented acknowledges those challenges, focusing on defining liminal paths between humanitarian design, right to shared landscapes, and well-being of communities. The lecture also reflects the work that Gabriella is doing at the IFLA's working group, Landscape Architects Without Borders. So just some very quick housekeeping rules. Don't forget that Gabriella is sharing her screen, as you can see, so keep this window open so you can see the slides. And I also would ask you to remain muted throughout the talk, and do not worry, at the end we will have time for questions, either verbally or you can also write them in the chat box if you feel a little shy. Without further ado, please join me in giving Gabriella a warm welcome all the way from Beirut, Lebanon.
Okay, thank you, Bruno. Thank you for inviting me to this series of lecture. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you today, and I feel part of this big community that is sprawled and dispersed all over the world. And thank you for your introduction. And today, what I will do is kind of thought aloud. I mean, it's a kind of discussion that I want to share with you, and it's kind of a reflection about what I did in the past years while living in Lebanon, and a series of questions that I would like to share with you on how to move forward. Then I will start with this sentence that Karl Schwab said during the World Economic Forum, and he spoke about the Great Reset. And there were two questions that were really important. How can we seize this moment of disruption to push for a world that is healthier, more resilient, sustainable, and just? And what do all of us, individuals, business, and governments, need to do to ensure that we don't simply revert to what was before? Then these are the two questions at the beginning, and then you will see that we will finish also with other questions. And I move directly to this image of Banksy, the land artist, and because as Bruno mentioned in the introduction, my work in the past years was focused specifically on migration and in relation to landscape. And I found it really interesting, this image in which there are these birds competing, saying migrants not welcome, go back to Africa, keep off our worms, and seeing ourselves in the position of the birds, it's quite frightening. And why it's frightening? Because if we look really at what's happening in the world, 1% of humanity is uprooted. I'm in between them, but in a more lucky position. And there are 100 millions of people that were displaced in a decade. And specifically, if we look at this graph, the forcibly displaced people in millions passed from 2010 to 2019 from 41.1 million to 79.5 millions. That in itself, it's really frightening. But what really scares more is how they are divided. The fact that there are only in Venezuela, Venezuelans displaced abroad, 3.6 million, 4.2 million asylum seekers, 45.7 million internally displaced people, and 26 million refugees. And then if we look at this dashboard, we have in the middle something that really must let us think on what we are doing. There are over 30 million children that are forcibly displaced. And the majority of the people displaced, they came from just 5 countries. And these countries are Syria, with 6.7 million, South Sudan with 2.3 million, Afghanistan with 2.7 million, Myanmar with 1.1, and Somalia with 900,000. Then, as Bruno mentioned before, my concern and my studies is more focused on the Mediterranean region first, because I'm born and I was raised just in the middle of the Mediterranean, because I come from Sicily. And second, because I spent all my life working and moving all around the Mediterranean region and moving from north to south, from east to west. Then what's the situation in the Mediterranean region? And the we know, and we have this displacement that never stopped between the different part of the Mediterranean basin, and the number of people dying are increasing due to the political decision and the governmental rules that were taken specifically in the last year. And this idea and this concept of Fortress Europe is leading us on refusing people and letting people dying without helping them. Then I believe that while we are in 2020, this is really something that we can't stand on. But as we have seen before, the major crisis, the one that is really taking over right now, and is the Syrian crisis, with 5.6 million Syrian refugees and 6.6 million that are displaced inside the country. And 90% of the Syrian refugees live in urban areas in the neighboring countries, and specifically in Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt. And I have to say that since I arrived in Lebanon in 2012, I have seen all the evolution of the movement and displacement of people. And all of this movement is creating a new Mediterranean landscape, but I'm not sure we can be proud of this new Mediterranean landscape. If we look at the pictures that I selected down, there are people that are dying, there are people that are impoverished, that live in really difficult conditions, and then as a landscape architect, that I'm interested in the social and cultural component, but also the spatial configuration of our landscape. I'm really worried of the future of this part of the world. And looking at Lebanon, the way the migration of Syrians shaped the landscape of the country is tangible and intangible. Tangible in the series of informal tended settlements that were spread all over the country, creating this kind of horizontal and geographical urbanization, and they were all located in agricultural land. On the other hand, it's less visible, and it's happening in the urban, peri-urban area, and we have Syrians living in a residential building, and we have this vertical occupation and density, and in the majority of the case, these are buildings that are that are not finished, or they were abandoned for a specific reason. Then they live really in substandard conditions, or they live in substandard buildings like, for example, garage or other type of space in suburban area. These are some of the data that I took from the UNHCR. They are not very updated. They are back to 2018. Then it's a little bit ago. But what's important is the fact that there is this continuous movement, and the number of floating and are changing continuously because of the movement of the Syrians inside of the country. And during my period in Lebanon, I did several research, theoretical and also practical with my students. And for example, I researched, and I'm still researching on this building in Saida. Saida is a city just on the coast. Then this is Beirut, and Saida is here, and in the southern part of Lebanon. And there is this. There was this building of frozen real estate development at the outskirts of Saida that was to become a campus for the Aliman Al-Uza University, and instead they welcome the refugees, and then now it's a kind of a vertical city. And inside there are in between 100 and 1,500 residents, and between 120 and 175 families. And there are a lot of kids, school-aged children, between 300 and 500. You can see from the pictures that I selected that obviously this building was not completed, and also it was not meant to be used for residential. And then what the people, obviously the refugees, they were on one side lucky to have a roof and a place where to stay, but they had to do a lot of work, and they were helped by several NGOs in order to readapt the location in order to create this sense of home and stability. Then I was looking at the human action as a significant component of a site and also an important shaper of the ordinary everyday life, because this is what makes the difference, the ordinary and everyday life, how people use and transform this space. Going to the rural area, then you can see in the map the location and how they are all spread. All of these informal tented settlements, they are all spread all over the country, with certain areas that are more crowded than others. And for example, there is all the Bekaa Valley, that is this plain, the agricultural plain, the most important of Lebanon, where Syrians are located in majority. Obviously, this is all the border with Syria, and then they obviously this and this part of Lebanon are the easiest and the nearby location for them to stay. And this is where the Bekaa Valley, with some of the villages where they are founding home and where they are settling. And I was looking at all the information, the data that UNHCR was able to collect in the past years, looking at the services like toilet, water, and schools, all the type of infrastructures that were created for each of these informal settlements. And you can see in these maps that are reporting and depicting two of these villages in the Bekaa Valley, how many informal settlements are located in these small villages. Then this is how they appear. I mean, if this is the village, they are all spread, all this red, they are all spread in the rural settlement. And they have as a border the rural channel for the agricultural channels, or sometimes other natural infrastructure. Then there are some thought that Natasha Quintero was writing down, and they are related on how we can integrate this planning, planning and sustainable development, and how they can consider the informal as a part, an important part of the landscape discourse, and how the informal settlement can engage in the transformative processes that make new urban scenarios. Then while researching, I started to be interested in the concept of humanitarian design. I mean, this human-centered design strategy to address the contemporary humanitarian challenges. And there are several organizations that are working on that. And as Bruno mentioned before, I'm the part of one of these organizations, and I'm the chair of the International Federation of Landscape Architects working group, Landscape Architects Without Borders. But then while working with this group and researching, I discovered that there are so many agencies working with refugees at different levels. And there are really a series of network. But what about the landscape architecture? This is something new. I mean, how and why landscape architect can contribute to the migratory phenomena, and how we can intervene due to the fact that the majority of these crises are crises that are continuous crises. They never stop. Then looking at what's the situation in Lebanon, the fact that we have informal tented settlement, residential building, substandard buildings. In all of these, what come is that there is a lack of planning and design, lack of infrastructure and services, high environmental depletion of natural resources. I mean, there are a series of problematics. And looking at what landscape planning and design can do, and what are our type of work, I try to select the typology of work that are related to landscape planning and design that can contribute to intervene in these conditions. But I will go a little bit fast, and I want to show you some of the example and the work that I have done with my students mostly. And this is, for example, a small informal settlement nearby Saida, and we worked to implement some small intervention. By the end, we weren't able to implement anything, but it was really an important work that we conducted together as a community service and service learning. And what we did, the informal settlement, it's really small, only 21 families, but with 81 children. And the number of tents, it's around 20. And this is the condition, and the settlement in reality is really in a lucky position because it's in the middle of a banana field. And we had different brainstorming sessions, and we interrogate professors and architects, and also NGOs in order to understand how they are or how they intervene in similar situations. But the students were not really I mean, they were in crisis. They were always asking me why we have to work over there, and what's our role? What can we do? How can we help them? It was clear for them that there was a need to work with kids, but as for the rest, they were unable to see how to really give a contribution. Then what we did, we did a series of field work to assess the area, and we had also semi-structured interview with the people, with the community over there, and then we decided to work in 4 main categories: border, vegetation, children, and water. Then the students selected one of these topics, and they produced several projects. For example, this is one of the projects working on the border and transforming a liminal element in and then a really inconsistent element in something with a depth and that is with a functionality, in order also to create space where to gather and to spend time. And then this is a little bit more poetic. There was this idea of creating gardens that were hung in the few trees that were located in the camps. And this instead was more thinking of the future, imagining how to reconvert the place once the camps will be destroyed, and looking at this space in between, this narrow space in between the tents and the outside, that was also the place where the water and then the first earths used to grow, and thinking at the concept of trace and time and transformation. And obviously there were also projects working with kids and investigating the different activities that they were involved in, and trying also to imagine on how to transform it and how to create something more interesting for them. Then with this project and also with other projects, we participated also several activities like the Students' Sharing Engagement Conference and Workshop titled Refugees and Marginalized Community in Lebanon and Egypt. And the students from these two countries were working together and presenting their work during the semester, and we worked in one area that is in really deprived and disadvantaged area of Beirut, and the students were imagining small intervention, also looking at the implementation, working with kids, working in order to create social cohesion, or working with agriculture in order to create space for community that could be also productive spaces. Then some years ago, I was able to organize this workshop. Also, thank you to the participation of several professors coming from different universities around the world. And this is the group. There are a few that are missed in this picture, but what's important is the fact that we created a kind of community with the people and the Syrians living in this informal settlement. And we are in Barelias in the Bekaa Valley, and this is how the situation evolved throughout the years, with the numbers of informal settlement that were every years coming up, and the methodology that could be divided in 4 parts. I mean, there was the first part in which student and professor brainstormed and created the framework plan, identifying the problematic. Then there were day by day feedback and meeting with the community that were divided in between men, women, teachers, and we had also UNHCR coming because it was involved in the process. And then finally we had this, we came up with this design strategy on creating a network of gardens, space for looking at genders, specifically at the women and the young, the girls, and the infrastructural element, then place for kids and space for kids. Then we had the participation of the community. They were giving feedback every time we were implementing the project, and they were collaborating with us. And by the end, we were able to construct, to build these 4 interventions. And these are the different phases with the participatory approach and the meeting with the community. And this is the map. There was a school outside the informal settlement, and in red the three interventions: the pedestrian connection, the children playground, and the water garden. And here are some of the images of the work that we were able to build together with the community over there, and specifically with the kids that were always with us. And this was a really great, let's say, it was a moment of experimentation. After that, there were a series of more theoretical events, like forum, or there is a research that I'm part of that it's an Horizon 2020 that is looking at migration, but it's, let's say that I'm more interested in kind of in interdisciplinary type of work. And then our department, the LDM, is the only landscape component of the project, and it's enriching because we are learning a lot, and they are learning from us on how to intervene in the case of migration, and also working on governance of migration. And then finally, with a friend of mine, we were able to set up a chair, an UNESCO chair in Mediterranean landscape in emergency. And we had the final go. It was last year, but due to the pandemic, everything was freezed. Then we are in hold. Then we have the Landscape Architect Without Borders, and then we have other type of project, and also the participation of the Landscape Architect Without Border groups to several other organizations like the Global Alliance for Urban Crisis, and we are also partnering with Architect Without Borders. But going back to Beirut, after and during this experience with migration, that I was really interested. Something happened in Beirut, and because Beirut is a country in which social inequality and political unrest are the let's say, the everyday conditions. And Lebanon has one of the highest wealth inequality ratios in the world. But suddenly, last year on October 17, something happened. And then the community and the people, the Lebanese all together, started protesting, and they went to the street. They were blocking the street, and there were a lot of really difficult moments, but in the majority of the case, it was peaceful. And what really interested me and all the designers looking at the phenomena was the way in which people finally occupied the void of the city center. And they created a new type of spaces. As you can see here in the pictures, they were working, they were doing yoga, they were relaxing, they were discussing, they were creating in the road a sense of home, as a collective space. And this was for me something new that I was aiming for several years since I came to Beirut. And finally, I was so happy to see that especially the young, they were in the street, and they were using the space for public uses. And there was an architect, Antoine Attallah, that created these interesting maps on how the the central part of Beirut was occupied by the different groups of protesters to conduct different type of activities. During all the day, there were several activities organized in several parts of the city center. And this was something unusual. And what they created was this inclusive space and this welcoming to all the segments of the society, and especially to the middle class, the underprivileged class. And at one point, there were almost 2 million people on the street. If you consider that in Lebanon there are 4 million people. And then it was something really amazing. And it was a moment of hope. And this hope and this finally seeing people fighting for a better future. But then the COVID arrived and we went in lockdown, no matter the numbers were really low back in March. And we know about the coronavirus, and I will not stress too much on that. But what's really mattered to me and the effect of the pandemic on Lebanon, and how this pandemic created a lot of issues, and it was a layer of crisis on top of other crises the country was passing through. And it arrived really at a specific moment in which already the country was facing an economical and a political difficult situation. But no matter the coronavirus, the people were still on the street and they were protesting, all united. And then suddenly something happened. It was the 4th of August, and I was not in Beirut. And something really striking happened, and there was this shock wave that destroyed a big portion of the city. And you can see in the map the area that we are here. This is the area, the explosion was here, and this was the area that was most affected versus the other. And this explosion was called by the Prime Minister as a great national disaster. And it's true, it was a disaster, it's still a disaster that we are dealing with since August 4. And if you see this map, in red is the area that was most affected. But then with the orange and the light orange, you can see how vast is the area that was affected by the blast, by the explosion. If you imagine that I live somewhere here, and also the American University of Beirut that is here was in part affected by the blast, and it's really far away from the center of the explosion. Then it was reported at the beginning that there were more than 70 dead after the explosion, but in reality, the number of deaths are increasing every day. And today, these are the numbers that I took some days ago, but today reached 2014. And we are not sure about the number of missing. They say 7, but it seems that they could be also higher. And we have more than 6,000 injured people. And all the world react to this blast in Lebanon, and sending help and donation, everything. And if you consider that there are 77,000 damaged housing units and 300,000 residents that are affected, then I think it's really huge. But how the community reacted? On one side, they were protesting, they were fighting again. On the other side, you can see how the youth, they were the first going and helping and cleaning and organizing every type of help, donation, food, in order to rise again. And there was a lot of anger and a lot of rage versus the government, because there were also on all the media that the Lebanese people are resilient, and there was a lot of discussion on what this resilience is, and there was this Kim Gattas, that is a senior fellow, that wrote down that it's true that they are resilient, but the fact that the Lebanese found a solution to everything, it means that they don't solve the problem from the root. And this is something really important. And then how is Lebanon today? I tried, and this is also how I feel. I mean, I feel that we are going down, and there is this set of multiple and overlapping crises. And you can ask yourself, but what's the meaning of all of this in relation to landscape architecture? Meaning is that this in this person, in this image, there is 0% interest in people from the government. It's true that the community are able and that they are showing that they can by themselves rise again, but that doesn't mean that it's enough. And what really matters me is that this explosion came in a particular moment of difficult condition the country was passing through, and the most affected people in reality were and are as usual the vulnerable segment of the Lebanese society, and in particular the migrant workers and refugees, because they were already a marginalized community, and they found themselves in a really dire situation with really few options. And if you consider that the majority of the migrant workers and refugees, they were, sorry, I go fast because I want to show you where they were living. They were just living in the area where the blast, the area that was most affected, and with the majority of Syrians, but also people coming from Bangladesh, from Ethiopia, from Sudan, from Egypt, and they were they are still the most affected one, and they are asking in the majority of the case to have food and to have shelter and medicament. But since I'm working with my students in this area, and my students also, they were asking me, but how we can intervene, what we can do in this condition. We would like to help, and the community is in need, but how we can intervene. And also was asking myself, as a chair of Landscape Architect Without Borders, how I can intervene. And I questioned myself for 2 months, and still I thought that as a group that is like Doctors Without Borders, it seems that we have to intervene at the beginning when a crisis arises. But in reality, I still didn't figure out how the emergency and how you can act in the emergency at the beginning of the emergency. and in search of multiple crises. And I was looking in between my books and my magazine, and I found that this number of 2011 of focus crisis landscapes, and it means that the crises were still there back to then. And then I have to say that when last year in Oslo, there was this, the launch of the next E-class conference, Stop and Think, I thought that in reality, this is what maybe we need to do, and what I need in this moment. I mean, it's kind of taking time and rethink the way we look at the crisis, and the way we use to understand and to react as a designer, and to look at really what we value, how we can act, and specifically what we can leave. And I was looking and researching, and there is nothing in relation to the conflict and the crisis. There are a lot of writing and rules on the landscape architect on how to move forward to reduce the impact of climate change in response to natural disaster, and the fact that we have to work in collaboration, and we have to play a critical role, and etc. But and we talk about adaptation and mitigation. We can use the same word and the same concept also in the case of multiple crises and also conflict. But there is nothing specifically related to that. Also, if I looked at the outline, there are things that are more related to climate change and how the policies in relation to climate change. I still believe that landscape is really an essential component of the people, and it's through landscape that we express our identity. And we can, as a landscape architect, assist in the international aid through our emergency disaster relief, flood and sanitation control, and whatever. But I wrote this a few years ago, and honestly, I'm not sure that this is still valid. I mean, I'm still researching, and I'm still trying to identify what's our role in envisioning these scenarios to respond to certain crises. And then I found that while reading this piece on the Place Journal is an article of Miles and Friedman that All is Lost, Notes on Broken World Design. All is Lost is an interesting film that I suggest all of you to go and watch it. And it's true that maybe we have to rethink our way of looking at the phenomena that we are living. And there is this sentence that is taken from the Rethinking Repair by the computer scientist Stephen Jackson, that say that an appreciation of the real limits and fragility of the worlds we inhabit, and a recognition that many of the stories and orders of modernity are in process of coming apart, perhaps to be replaced by new and better stories and order, but perhaps not. And there is this concept of this broken thinking, this broken world thinking, and this way of looking at the things through design, and specifically considering sustainability and resilience, are still are we sure that this is the way we have to move forward, or we are still going in circle in order to perpetuate the existing order and continue on the treadmill of the modernity. And this is something that I'm still questioning myself, and I mean, I believe on this broken world thinking, this orientation that takes seriously the fragility of the human, the technical and the natural worlds around us. And I will conclude with this, that with this sentence, there is a crack in everything, and that's how light gets in. And thank you very much. And sorry if I was a little bit longer than I expected.
Oh, was excellent. Thank you very much, Gabriella, for sharing your work and your passion. I think it's very timely to listen to all of these, especially with all the COVID disruptions this year, to really not really helping most of those issues. Now it's time for questions, and everyone is invited to ask questions directly to Gabriella, and don't forget to unmute yourself before doing that. Or if you feel a little shy, you can always type your questions in the chat box and we're going to read it. Giving you some time to prepare those, I will just kickstart with a very quick and potentially brief question. Looking at all the work you have done with refugees and ethnic minorities in displaced communities, what do we need to know more as landscape architects that we don't know at the moment? What will better prepare us to deal with those topics?
I think we have to move from the concept of the design and to start looking and to wear different glasses. I have this luckiness of wearing glasses, and most of the time I have to say that when I'm stuck, I remove my glass and I see things differently, and this helped me figure out things. And I have the feeling that the solution is more simple than as we think, and we are overthinking, overdoing, complicating things that maybe are simple. And this is what I discovered when I was working with the practically on the field with the Syrians together. Everything was much simple and everything was easy to solve it. Instead, we are here debating, and there are all of these huge words, and there are a lot of political constraints, not economical constraints, but really this thinking and this political understanding of the things that is enable us to do the things that we need to do. And I believe that we have to start again, and we have to go on the field, and we have to start with this ethnographic campaign and to start communicating and listening to the community, and everything will be much easier.
Great answer. And we have a question from Dorita Hannah.
Thank you, Bruno. Thank you, Maria. Hi. Hey, that was great. Thank you so much. Very, very interesting. And of course, I was particularly interested in this because I have family in Lebanon and Beirut. But what I really, I guess I found a bit of hope in, because I know how desperate the situation is there, was that fact that, you know, you talked about the October uprising and the fact that, you know, you had all these lovely grassroots gatherings where this urban space was being taken over by communities with kind of these amazing, simple communal and personal activities. And I was just wondering about, you know, the explosion then as catastrophic as it is, but kind of also representing the kind of need in a way, not need, but the fact that Lebanon has this kind of complete meltdown, you know, political, social, fiscal, is, I guess what I'm trying to say is, do you think there's a possibility to engage with some of those things that came up during the October uprising as a way of, you know, being able to redevelop the area with these kind of pockets that were so clearly established during the uprising? Because I'm aware there's the, you know, the kind of the big Starchitect buildings that have gone in and the big kind of very privately owned commercial developments of public space that have happened recently. But just wondering if you see any hope in your wonderful optimism that you left us with at the end for some of these things that you noticed during the October uprising to somehow be integrated in the developments post-explosion?
Look, I have seen in the past month that there are a lot of cultural protests, and there is also sharing of awareness in order for the people not to move, not to leave their houses, to recreate what's happened with Soler after the war. Then this is giving us hope in order for not to replicate what's happened before and to start from and to you know, move everything and start from scratch. And I think there are still people that are interested, and they hope that the test can at least, if not go at the governmental level, at the level of the city, can create some changes. And I believe this will happen because the youth understood that they have a power, that they can do things. They were not aware that they could do it. And they are questioning certain things that before they thought they were normal, and now they understand that it was not. And then I have this hope, and I have this hope in the youth, in all these young that went there just the day the explosion happened, to clean and to help. Then this is my hope, and that's why I concluded with this final sentence, that there is a light somewhere in every crack, and I really believe in the power of people, in the power of the community. I feel that every revolution needs time. And but something happened, and we can forgive, and they will remember, and they will use it, and there will be not a big change, but there will be small changes that will be distributed all over. This is what I imagine for the future of this country. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorita, and thank you, Gabriella. There is a question from Fatine Kikano.
Hi, Maria. How are you?
Hi. Finally, I see you.
We're in touch by email. Thank you for a brilliant presentation, extremely insightful. And thank you for bringing me back to these places where I did my fieldwork not so long ago, and for the beautiful work you did with your students. And thank you also for having the sense of place and belonging that you talked about regarding refugees, that you develop it in my country, and it's very touching. And for the message of hope that you are giving me as a Lebanese, I'm very, very touched by your words. So thank you for that. I have two questions for you. The first one is about your approach in the field work. So how did you solve the ethical problems, this power imbalance between you as a foreigner, researcher, university professor, and the refugees? Because I had some issues in this during my field work. And the second question, because my research is about space appropriation, how do you create or help create a sense of place and belonging in such very vulnerable conditions? And I'm sure that the conditions are even much more vulnerable today than they were a couple of years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Fatima, first of all, for your kind words. It's true that after 8 years, I feel part of this country, and I really care about this place. And I really hope that at least with my work, I was able to give something to this country and to be helpful. As for the question, then the ethical issue, it's a really big issue while working with certain categories of people. And first we were selecting a camp, a settlement in which already the American university had some bound. Then they were prepared. They were, and we had a kind of connection. Then we went during winter. We met the people, we did a tour, then we had a brainstorming, only the professors, they came from the different countries, and we met and we did a tour. We met several international organizations who were working with Syrian, and we visited the different camps. And then it was not something that it happens, you know, then there was a preparation to the workshop. And once we were there, these day-to-day meetings with the community was a way of trying to understand and to not to impose things, but to understand really they need. And it was really a difficult thing because they were, especially the men, they were asking for practical things. I need a passport, you can help me with the bureaucratic things, you know. Instead, the women were really helpful. They really gave us a lot of info, a lot of direction during the brainstorming and the things, but also when we're implementing the work. They were with us saying, don't do this, it could be unsafe for kids. Do it in this way, we need this, you can organize this in this way. They really working with us. And this was really important. We tried really to move inside of the settlement without creating too many you know, changes and problems, but also by the end, when we finished everything, we organized a day in which with all the community, we went through all the spaces and we were discussing, we were sharing information, they were saying what they liked, what they didn't. Then it's really something of bounding, creating bound link in between us and them, but often between them, because in most of the case they were not communicating. Then we tried not to impose the sense of community in a space like that, in which you are forced to live with other people that you don't know. And what we were able to live in the case of the appreciation and creating this sense of feeling of being at home, what happens is that they were asking for certain things. I mean, we were planting things, we were creating small gardens, and they asked us to have plants in order for them to plant it in this space inside of the cluster of tents. And I didn't mention because there was no time, but everything was destroyed over there. But it was not destroyed by the community. It was destroyed by the owner of the land, because all these settlements are built in private land. And no matter the fact that he was always with us, he was aware, he was keen to collaborate and whatever, but only to show that he has a power over them, and then they have to be afraid of taking certain decision, then he destroyed everything. But when we went again, all the person that were working with us, all the people that were still there, they were asking us to come back again, and they were showing us how much they were able to organize small garden, to organize small activities. I mean, we empower in a way also them, and maybe we gave some hope for, not for a future, but at least for the time that they have to spend over there.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
I call this in my thesis hospitality.
Yes.
Hostile hospitality. So they rent the land, but they rent
Yeah.
the land for refugees at a certain price, which is normally exploitation. Thank you.
Yes, this is.
Thank you, Fatin. Last questions from Larry Harder.
Hi, Gabriella. So nice to see
Hi, Larry.
you. Time. I've got a couple of questions. You probably don't recognize me. I've got a COVID beard. Couple of questions, comments, perhaps, in two streams. One has to do, first of all, with the refugees and Barilias and Italiano and all that stuff. And the other one has to do with what's happened recently with the explosion in Beirut. What unites my comments is that what we have in both cases is people who are marginalized or have been made marginalized by circumstances, for example, the explosion, right? And these people are found, they find themselves in a sort of a desperate situation, right? That's not of their own making. And there is, at one level, the need, that we have as professionals and aid agencies and so on to step in and to fix it all up. And I think certainly there is, a role for that. But the thing that I find really interesting is that there's also a kind of a grassroots energy that does things in spite of everything that's happened. That's resilience. But in spite of everything that somebody else might want to do. The first time I was with Gabriella on the project in the Becca, and the first time we went there, I think all of us professionals had sort of an idea of what we thought they needed, right? We'd done all our research, we'd done all of our theory and stuff like that, and then we got there. And some of the stuff they'd done already between our first visit and our second visit. One of the discussions was, maybe they needed a worship space or something like that. Well, we got back and, a space had been turned into a mosque. Hey, how about that? We didn't have anything to do with that. The community was self-organizing. And I think there was a lot of that went on. We stepped in, and I think that we had to become a lot more humble. that we didn't know what was the right thing to do. I mean, we could be aware of the limitations, and what we could do is offer some example, I suppose, of how to do it. And I don't think, I mean, we were there at first, they didn't really know what we were there to do. But as they saw us working, and as we talked to them a little bit more, I think that they kind of bought into the idea, and then they ended up helping, and I think they continued some of that work after we left as well, because we left some equipment and stuff like that. So what I'm thinking about all of this is that, a real key to some of this stuff has to do with not going in with big ideas, but going in with a kind of community engagement that says, okay, as landscape architects or artists or engineers or ecologists or whatever we are, we have some tools that we might be able to use in the right way for the right purposes for the people who kind of decide it themselves. That's just one observation. I go to the observation about Beirut, and I see sort of the same thing happening. The occupation in not just the, because of the uprisings and so on, of all of those public spaces. And there's been a lot that's been looked at in terms of everything, since Tiananmen Square, what the role is of public spaces, for community expression and so on. You see that. I mean, I lived in Beirut for a while. I never saw more than a half dozen people in Martyr Square. And when I saw the images on television of the thousands, the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands of people in that space, I thought, aha, what we have here is not spaces that have been designed by designers. Because Martyr Square is basically a ruin. The main statue has bullet holes in it. They're left over from the Civil War. But what we have is people who are taking over the space for themselves. Now, what I wonder about, though, and there is a lesson here too, at the refugee camp, the empowerment of the people was trumped, inappropriate use of the term, I suppose, by the owner, by the power. It was basically able to say, okay, we'll let you have it, but then we'll take it away. The same thing happened in Beirut in another time after the Civil War. Solidaire took the opportunity to create a brand new city away from the people and created basically a real estate development. And, my wonder is, how can this power of the people, so to speak, be maintained in this imbalance of power that happens, between the people who have it? How can that energy that's in Martyr Square make a change? I'm not sure that's going to happen in Lebanon. True revolutions, I think, are fairly rare, and sometimes catastrophic, and you never know what's going to happen from it. On the other hand, the devastation in Beirut has been horrendous, but other cities have responded and built up. Wellington, New Zealand did that after this earthquake. There are all sorts of war-torn countries that have done that. And, so I think that, the question of whether there's going to be, it's going to rise again, I think is a moot question. The question is, what's going to rise again and who is going to be engaged in it? So I've been editorializing a little bit, but maybe I'll let you talk now, Gabriella.
Yeah. Thank you, Larry, for your comments, and I agree with whatever you mentioned, and you were with me and with all the rest of the group, and yes, it's true what you mentioned. As for Beirut, this is the question nowadays. I mean, there is this reality that they are only waiting and something will be overpowering the community, and there will be this reconstruction that will change totally the situation in the areas, and obviously there will be a relocation of the the more disadvantaged community that were living over there. But on the other hand, it's true that during all of this here, a lot of changes happened, and a lot of lawyers also were giving or they were putting their knowledge and they were sharing all their thoughts using all the social media in order to help all the people that were having and were passing through several legal issues. And then I believe that there is a change happening. There is a transformation in the air, and it cannot be, if something will happen, it will not be as a second Solidar. It will be different. What I'm expecting is that for sure all the heritage buildings that were present in the area, they will be fast recovered, and already they are in there are a lot of work going on, and there are a lot of money coming and donation. For the rest, it will take a lot of time. And in some cases, there will be, this blooming of these huge buildings coming up. But in other cases, the situation will be recovered, and there will be this sense of the locals that will stay there. Then if I have to imagine a scenario, it's a mix of several things that will be combined together, but it will not, the explosion, it will not create again this complete tabula rasa, but there will be a combination of several things that will cohabit together. This is my feeling and also my hope, and there are a lot that are really pushing in order of things not to be as before. Also at the order of engineers and architects, and there are the UNESCO involved. There are a lot of things that are giving us the hope that it will not be as before. But we cannot be sure, because this is a special environment, let's say. This is a special place with around a lot of complicated conditions. And then this is only what I hope that could be the future. And what I'm working also with my students to imagine a better condition for the future of the area. But,
just one observation before I sign
yes.
off is, by your map, the areas that were least destroyed in Beirut are the areas where the Palestinian Sabra and Shatila refugees camps are.
Yes,
I think
yes.
that's kind of ironic.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Okay, thank you, Larry and Gabriella. I think we're going to stay here. This has been a very interesting talk, and once again, it's so good to see your work, and please do keep going. And on behalf of the New Zealand Institute of Landscape Architects and Victoria University of Wellington, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us today. And I do hope to see you soon, face to face.
Me too.
And I wish you all the best, and thank you everyone for attending one of our Thinkers and Doers, and I do wish to see you again in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you, Bruno, and thank you all for your time at this time of the day, depending where you are. Yes.
Goodbye, Gabriella. We'll talk again soon, I hope.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you
Take
all.
care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.